There's a reason the latest WNBA controversy feels bigger than a single player, a single foul, or even a single argument about transgender athletes. Because Sophie Cunningham didn't just say something controversial. She stepped directly into one of the most politically explosive debates in American sports. And almost immediately, the conversation around her became bigger than basketball. Then Brett Cooper jumped into the fight. Former NBA players started challenging the league's eligibility rules. And suddenly the WNBA was facing a question it could no longer keep at arm's length. What exactly does its own definition of eligibility mean? And here's where this story gets especially interesting. The competitor version of this story tries to make Brittany Griner the center of a mystery about her identity. But there's a problem with that narrative. There is no credible evidence establishing those rumors, and turning them into fact would completely miss the much bigger controversy actually happening in front of everyone. The real story is about Cunningham, the WNBA's policies, the reaction from players and fans, and what happens when a league built around women's professional basketball gets pushed to publicly explain how it defines eligibility. And once you follow the timeline, the whole thing starts looking very different. Sophie Cunningham had already become one of the WNBA's most recognizable personalities before this controversy exploded. She was known for playing with an edge, for protecting teammates, for getting under opponents' skin, and, especially since joining Caitlin Clark in Indiana, for becoming one of those players who could turn a normal game into a social media event without even trying. But in July 2026, Cunningham moved from basketball controversy into something much larger. In an ESPN profile, she addressed the criticism she had received over her views on transgender athletes and pushed back on the idea that those views meant she hated trans people. Her argument was that she wanted to protect girls and women in sports and believed there should be boundaries around who competes in female categories. She then doubled down the following day, saying she stood by what she had said and describing her position as common sense. Those comments immediately turned her into one of the most polarizing figures in the league. The Washington Post described her as an outlier in a WNBA culture that has historically been strongly associated with progressive advocacy, while the Los Angeles Times noted that the league's collective bargaining agreement says only women are eligible to play, but does not specifically spell out a transgender exclusion. And that distinction matters, because Cunningham wasn't simply making a political statement and walking away. She was challenging the framework of a professional sports league she was actively playing in. That meant every interview suddenly had a second layer. When reporters asked about basketball, their what happens when one WNBA player refuses to back down on an issue the rest of the league would rather discuss carefully? In Sophie Cunningham's case, the answer has been almost impossible to contain. Within weeks, her comments about transgender athletes turned her from a tough fever role player into one of the most talked about people in women's basketball. Then came protests, political reactions, Brett Cooper weighing in, former NBA players challenging the league's eligibility language, and finally a vicious on-court collision with Dejounte Carrington that sent the entire controversy into another gear. But here's the part people are missing. The biggest story isn't whether Cunningham won the argument. It's that the WNBA now has to manage a debate involving its players, its fans, its rules, and its public identity, all at the exact moment. The league is bigger than it has ever been, and the latest developments suggest this isn't going away anytime soon. Cunningham didn't become controversial because she tried to become a political celebrity. She became controversial because she answered a question directly. In an ESPN profile, she pushed back against accusations that she hated transgender people and said her position was about protecting young girls and women in sports. She didn't retreat when the criticism arrived. Instead, she repeated that she stood by what she had said. That was the moment the temperature changed. This wasn't a vague social media post that could disappear in 24 hours. Cunningham had attached her name and her reputation to the position, and suddenly everyone wanted to know what the WNBA was going to do about it. The reaction was enormous, with supporters praising her for speaking openly and critics accusing her of promoting exclusion. Her profile exploded outside basketball, and even her jersey sales and social media following reportedly surged. But Cunningham's biggest problem wasn't simply that people disagreed with her. It was that she was making those comments inside one of the most politically distinctive leagues in professional sports. The WNBA has a long history of LGBTQ+ advocacy, and many of its players and coaches have publicly supported transgender inclusion. So when Cunningham said women's sports should protect biological women, she wasn't making the statement in an empty room. She was walking directly into an established culture, and that created a collision that was almost guaranteed to become bigger than one player's opinion. Her supporters saw a player challenging the league's prevailing worldview. Her critics saw a player using her platform to promote a position they considered harmful. And the WNBA suddenly had to figure out how to defend inclusion without turning a disagreement over policy into a fight over whether one of its own players was allowed to speak. That distinction became crucial. Then Brett Cooper entered the picture, and the audience got much bigger. Cooper publicly defended Cunningham and Ada, Caitlin Clark, Brett Cooper, the league office, and even former NBA players challenging the WNBA's eligibility language. And the strangest part is that the biggest rumor surrounding the story isn't even the part with evidence behind it. The real story is much bigger. Sophie Cunningham said she believes women's sports should protect biological women. Critics pushed back, supporters rallied around her, and the WNBA suddenly found itself under pressure to explain exactly how its eligibility rules work. Then, just when the controversy seemed like it might settle down, a hard foul involving Cunningham and Dejounte Carrington sent everything straight back into the headlines. And now the question isn't simply whether Cunningham was right or wrong. It's whether the WNBA can keep its players, fans, and growing audience from turning every disagreement into another full-scale culture war. Sophie Cunningham has never exactly been the quiet player in the room. Her reputation was built on toughness, physical defense, trash talk, and a willingness to get involved when teammates needed backup. But this summer, her biggest controversy had nothing to do with a box score. In an ESPN profile, Cunningham spoke about transgender athletes and said she wanted to protect young girls and women in sports. She also made a point of saying she didn't hate transgender people and believed there was room to love everyone while still holding her position about women's sports. Then came the sentence that changed everything. She said she stood by what she had said. No apology, no attempt to disappear from the conversation, no carefully crafted statement designed to make everyone happy. She simply doubled down.